Hey everyone, in this video I am breaking down Volume 3 of the John Constantine Hellblazer run, and this is the third part of the Jamie Delano segment of the run, and we will soon eventually be getting to Garth Ennis, which I am really excited about. Now, the thing with this volume is that it is terrible. This is a really bad volume, in my opinion. So far, I've actually not been minding Jamie Delano's run. The first volume was really good. The second volume was still pretty good, but this particular volume is not good. And I was curious, so I was reading online, seeing what other people's opinions were of it, if it was just me. And there are some people out there that defend this volume and still say it is good, and all of Jamie Delano's run is good. But there are a lot of people that do consider this one of the worst volumes of Hellblazer, and I'm falling more into that camp. So I'm sorry if some of you like this, but I'm really negative on this volume. I had a real hard time with it. So it is just really long and overwritten. There are so many characters. It is very convoluted. There's a large segment of the story where John Constantine is hanging out with these hippies that maybe is not the most compelling. And it ends in the most bizarre WTF way ever. The last 2 pages in this volume are batshit insane. Like, what is going on? What did I just read? What is this? So, we are powering through this one. We are powering through, trying to get to Garth Ennis. And I did my best to make this video compelling and to try to tell a summarized version of the story in a clear, concise way. So, bear with me. I did my best. Let's dive into it. Hellblazer, Volume 3. Hellblazer Volume 3, The Fear Machine. Written by Jamie Delano. Art by Mark Buckingham, Richard Piers Rayner, Mike Hoffman, and Alfredo Alcala. This volume is a 9-issue story covering Hellblazer's issues 14 through 22. Hellblazer, Issue 14, The Fear Machine, Part 1, Touching the Earth. John wakes up in the apartment of a girl he has been hooking up with. He then goes to the corner store to buy some cigarettes, and he notices his face plastered on the cover of the newspaper. The headline reads, "Face of Evil, Satanist Slayer Sought." The beginning of the article then reads, "Police are urgently seeking this man, ex-mental patient and punk rocker John Constantine, in connection with a brutal double slaying in Paddington earlier this year." If you remember last volume, the demon Nergal killed John Constantine's landlady Miss McGuire, as well as another tenant in the building. Well, apparently the newspaper is blaming John Constantine for those deaths, and he is now a wanted man. So John decides to go into hiding, go somewhere a little bit more secluded. So John hitchhikes for a bit, and then once he leaves that particular car, he walks for a while. He walks for a long while, and then he eventually finds a police officer driving around. So John's worried about that, so he decides to go into the woods. As he's in the woods, he accidentally falls down an escarpment into a stream, and he dirties his clothes. Once the coast is clear of the cops, John strips off his clothes and tries to dry them. That is when suddenly a teenage girl named Mercury comes across John. Mercury is a young girl that lives in a hippie commune here in the woods. She is also a powerful psychic. Mercury, seeing John's bare ass, notices the little tattoo of a tree on it. She tells John, "I like your tattoo, it's really cool." If you remember back in Volume 1, when Swamp Thing and John Constantine swapped bodies and Swamp Thing was in John's body, he messed with John and got a tattoo of a tree on his ass. Well, John still does not know about that tattoo on his butt. So when John hears this, he says, "Huh? What tattoo?" Mercury answers, "The tree on your bum, silly." John to this says, "I don't know what you're talking about, kid. Anyway, don't you know better than to talk to strange men?" Mercury, she claims that she knows that John is a decent man, and from his aura, she can tell that he's tired and hungry, and maybe a bit scared of something as well. She offers John to come back to her camp with her and meet the others. John, he's trying to lie low, and maybe staying in this hippie commune is a good way to do that. So eventually, John finds his way back to the hippie commune nomad camp with the others. At first, John feels very out of place, but slowly as the night goes on, he begins to warm up to the others in the camp, as they are all very nice and welcoming to him. Some of the other people at this camp are Eddie, who seems to be the sort of leader of their group. There's Marge. She is the teenage girl Mercury's guardian and mother figure. There's Errol. Errol is a little bit of a strange figure. He has the word zero tattooed on his forehead. He also has a funny kind of turn of phrase when he refers to good things as the bollocks. At one point, he says to Jan, fine lady, yeah, Marge is the bollocks, dude." When John goes to retire to his teepee for the night, someone in the camp shows their leader, Eddie, the newspaper with John's face on it and how John is a wanted man. Despite the allegations against John, Eddie seems not to be worried because the teenage girl, Mercury, approves of John, and they all seem to trust her judgment. Hellblazer Issue 15, The Fear Machine, Part 2, The Shepherd's Warning. John has been living with these peace convoy hippies for a while now. Enough time to grow a beard, anyway. One day he wanders through the woods and notices one of the other hippie girls there. Her name is Myra. John thinks she's kinda cute, and that maybe she has been eyeing him lately. John says good morning to her. Myra is really nervous around John. She kind of freaks out and tells him to keep his distance from her. And she says that she knows all about the claims in the paper, that he is some sort of satanic killer. She accuses him of being a black magician who plans to steal her friend Eddie's power and kill him. John tries to tell Myra that the newspaper is full of lies. This is something Eddie said as well. But Myra, she just continues panicking and freaking out. So John instinctively tries to hypnotize her, saying, "Stop, look at my fingers. My name is John. I'm kind to children and dumb animals. The newspaper is a hole in your mind. Now start counting. When you get to 3, see me for the first time today." When John finishes hypnotizing her, it didn't work as well as he liked. Myra, she did forget what John wanted her to forget, but she immediately realizes that John was using magic to mess with her head. She says, "What did you do? You did something, you bastard! You did something to my head!" Myra, she then leaves and goes back to camp. John, he's a little worried. He doesn't want to ruin his chance at a good life here with these hippies. Later on, the teenage psychic Mercury talks with John, and they go for a walk in the forest. They're walking along something called a ley line. Ley lines are going to be mentioned a lot in this story, so let me give you a little explanation on them. Ley lines are hypothesized alignments of landmarks, ancient sites, and other significant places. Some people believe that these imaginary lines contain a sort of mystical energy. People who believe in ley lines suggest that ancient civilizations constructed structures like Stonehenge, the pyramids of Giza, and other monuments along these lines because of their supposed energy. And supposedly, many ancient sites in England could be connected by a straight line on a map, and these alignments are ley lines. So John and Mercury, they walk along one of these supposed ley lines, and it leads to a stone circle on the hill. Mercury explains that if they walk the line, it should give them good energy. As they reach one of the stone circles, they continue walking to another one. But as they approach the other stone circle, it has been fenced off by a company called Geotronic. This gives Mercury a bad vibe. She claims that the stones, they seem to be giving off a feeling of fear. Mercury, she climbs over the fence and rushes towards these stones. There, a security guard confronts her and becomes rough with her. So John hops the fence and protects Mercury from this guard. Soon, some sort of supervisors working for this geotronic company, they come out to see what all of the commotion is. There's a little bit of some conversation, but eventually John and Mercury leave without an incident. As they walk away, Mercury says how she sensed some evil there. When they get back to camp, John talks with this Myra, and he apologizes for what happened between them that morning. Myra, she accepts John's apology, and she offers him some tea, which John happily drinks. Later on, John visits Errol at his van. Errol shows John a series of paintings. One in particular catches John's eye. Errol explains that a woman he met in Glastonbury painted it. She stayed for about a month, and then she headed up to Scotland with some heavy-duty pagan types. Errol explains that the woman was named Zed. John, from this convo, then realizes that this Zed is most likely the same Zed that he knew from the Resurrection Crusade. John thought she died, but I guess she did not. John can't think about this for too long, though, because he soon begins tripping balls on magic mushrooms. It turns out that when Myra offered John that tea earlier, well, she spiked it with magic mushrooms as revenge for what John did to her mind earlier that morning. So John, he begins going on a drug trip for several hours, and he runs through the forest by himself. So John, as he's tripping balls all through the night, he makes his way to one of those stone circles along one of the ley lines. And it's a little odd. There's someone else there, using some kind of electronic device attached to the stones. The man with the electronic device begins yelling some sort of incantation in Russian. Eventually the man stumbles and he cracks his head hard against one of the stones, maybe enough to kill him. Hours later, John's drug trip finally ends and he starts feeling better. The effects of the mushrooms wear off. And John, he finds no evidence of the man he saw earlier that cracked his head. John, he also wonders if his fear he felt on the drug trip was maybe amplified by the ley lines, by what Mercury was talking about earlier. Anyway, John heads back to the camp where Mercury's guardian, Marge, invites John into her bus. There, they talk for a while and they all fall asleep. And in the morning, when John wakes up, him and Marge have sex. Afterwards, both of them are pleased and happy. Mercury, who happens to share the bus with Marge, she reveals that she was there the whole time, listening. John grumpily tells her to go back to sleep. So, John, he's actually starting to kind of enjoy his life here with these hippies. He has a new kind of love interest in Marge, and he kind of sees this Mercury girl as a daughter figure. No good things can ever last in John's life, though. As they all sleep some more, some police begin to surround the campsite. Hellblazer issue 16, The Fear Machine, Part 3, Rough Justice. Mercury dreams of a man named Dr. Philip Fulton, one of the doctors that works for that mysterious geotronic organization we saw conducting experiments in the woods near the hippies. Mercury, she dreams of this Dr. Philip Fulton being forced to wear a rope around his neck, and then dying after being pushed from a tall suspension bridge. As Mercury dreams and John and Marge continue lying naked in bed together, the police eventually arrive. The police squad smashes through the window and forces their way into the motorhome where John, Marge, and Mercury are. This police squad is not a typical police squad. They seem to have some sort of ulterior motives. The police knock John out and they take Mercury and Marge with them. The police also tell the other hippies there in the camp that this commune is on private land and they are going to be checking for drugs and weapons. After these events, later on, we see Mercury and Marge are in the back of a police truck. Mercury is very upset at these events. Eventually, the truck stops, and that Dr. Philip Fulton, the man from Mercury's dream, he opens the truck door. And he injects Marge, the older one, with a drug that makes her a little bit loopy. And then they send her outside of the truck as they don't need her. This entire police squad raid on the hippie commune was just a smokescreen. The true goal was to capture Mercury and take her back to their headquarters, and use Mercury for some weird dark magic science bullshit they are doing. When John wakes up later, the other hippies inform him that despite the attacks from the police, only Mercury and Marge were arrested, and the police warned the others to be gone in 12 hours. John is very suspicious of the police that were behind the raid, so he decides to go to the nearest town and investigate and see if he can retrieve Mercury and Marge. So John, he goes into town to the police station, and he asks if Mercury and Marge were brought in, because, if they were arrested, they would be taken to jail. But the man working at the police station, he knows none of what John is talking about. No women have been brought back from any raids, although they did find one woman wandering the streets wearing only a blanket. Well, that woman is apparently Marge. Marge, remember, was injected with some kind of drug that made her a little loopy, so she's not fully aware of what's going on at the moment. The police officer there says that she did nothing wrong, though, so if John knows her, he's free to get her out of here. John will gladly take her. So John has retrieved Marge, but Mercury is still missing, which is very concerning. Before John leaves the police station, he notices one of the security guards from the geotronic site that he met the other day is there. That man's name is Davis. And Davis, he's talking to another police officer, and he says that he is there to report to Chief Beale. John, he makes a mental note of these police officers' names, Davis and Beale. He's gonna have to look into them and see what their connection is with the geotronic site and why they were attacking the hippies, and also why they maybe kidnapped Mercury. John, he eventually returns to the camp with Marge, and he talks with the camp leader, Eddie, in a sweat lodge. Through their conversation, John confirms his suspicions that the police that conducted the raid were some sort of special forces team, and they had come specifically for Mercury. Eddie also tells John that the ley lines that are near them, the ones that were connecting to the geotronic site, well, he investigated them and noticed that their positive charge has now somehow been turned into a black stream of negative energy. And the geotronic site that had been there, well, it seemed to have been now dismantled without a trace. The hippies all discuss their next move. The police told them they have 12 hours to get out of here. So where are they going to go now? They decide to go to Scotland and join forces with an eco-guerrilla group known as the Pagan Nation that they all know. This Pagan Nation group is also supposedly the one that Zed has joined. Marge doesn't like this idea, though. They can't just leave and abandon here when Mercury is missing. John Constantine, though, now he has shaved his face and cut his hair and no longer looks like a disheveled hippie. He promises Marge that he will save Mercury one way or another. So the rest of them can go. John is on the case. Before John leaves to go on this new mission to save Mercury, one of the other hippies, a woman named Sam, offers John a place to stay in London, should he need it. It's a discreet hotel run by a friend of hers. He just has to say that she sent him. So John, he heads off on this new mission. Elsewhere, Mercury has been brought to some sort of discreet facility. There she dreams of a man sobbing, and then the sobbing man stabs scissors into his eyes. It is a horrific dream. Mercury is then comforted by Dr. Fulton, but Mercury struggles away from him, warning him that she knows what's going to happen to him. She then, using her psychic abilities, shows Dr. Fulton the imagery we saw at the beginning of this issue, where Fulton had a rope hung around his neck, and then he was killed. After this, Fulton goes outside to clear his head. There, another man talks to him. He asks, Is she going to be worth the risk we took in acquiring her? Beale's men were a little vigorous, I hear. Fulton answers, "Oh, yes, sir, she's extremely talented." While they talk, Mercury worries about her mother, but she feels a little peace that at least John will be looking after her. Hellblazer Issue 17, The Fear Machine, Part 4, Fellow Travelers. John Constantine is on a train headed to London. Elsewhere at the Geotronics office, the head of their security, a man named Mr. Webster, receives some orders. A few issues ago, when John was in the woods tripping on magic mushrooms, he saw a Russian man there, hooking up some electronic devices to some standing stones, and we saw that Russian crack his head and die. Well, it turns out that that Russian guy was a Soviet spy that was trying to steal the technology that Geotronics was developing. Well, that spy in the woods there, he died, but he had a partner named Sergei Antonov. And the people at Geotronics are now ordering this Mr. Webster to take him out. So Mr. Webster, he gets on the job. They need to first track down this Sergei Antonov and figure out where he is. So Webster goes over to Dr. Fulton and asks him to find a suitable psychic tracker to help him find this Sergei Antonov. At first, they think that maybe Mercury would be sufficient, but Webster thinks she's too new and probably not powerful enough. So instead, they settle for another man named Corporal Morgan instead. So Corporal Morgan starts using his psychic powers and looking out into the world. He struggles for several minutes, but then he manages to get a location on Sergei Antonov. The Russian spy is apparently on a train headed to London, and it just so happens he is on the same train as John Constantine. So now Dr. Fulton and this Webster begin to form a plan to how they can take Sergei Antonov down. They are going to use the ley lines and intercept the train psychically. So Fulton and Webster take Corporal Morgan and send him into a weird-looking room. Inside the room are various stone pillars set up, with various lines connecting out from them. So now it is revealed what this Geotronics company is up to. They have built something called a fear machine. Using this fear machine and their powerful psychics, they can focus emotional energy and use the machine to send fear along these ley lines to drive people insane and cause death. So this Corporal Morgan, he gets into position under one of the stones, and he begins focusing emotional energy and begins transporting it across these ley lines to the train. So all of a sudden on the train, John Constantine is walking through the various train cars. Eventually, Corporal Morgan's blast of fear collides with the train on the ley line, and the train's engineer starts freaking out and causes the train to jerk a bit. John, as well as all the other passengers, are affected by fear as well. Everyone is just starting to act a little crazy, a little scared. They're all freaking out a little bit. John, he begins moving faster through the train. He sees people are starting to hang themselves and kill each other, and blood is everywhere. John at first thought that he was the main target of the fear, but then he realized that fear seemed to most be after this Sergei Antonov, and not him. When John hears Sergei Antonov speaking Russian, John remembers the strange man in the woods he saw doing an incantation also speaking Russian, and he wonders if there's a connection there. So John, even though he's fighting through the fear, he is following this Sergei Antonov. A man on the train gets in Sergei's way, and Sergei shoots the man. The wounded man then stumbles over to John and warns John that if the train isn't stopped soon, it will crash, as it's going too fast. So John, fighting through his own fear, pulls the emergency cord, making the train screech to a halt. The train was still going a little bit too fast, though, and it stops in a small wreck. Corporal Morgan, back at the Fear Machine, loses track of Sergei Antonov. In the aftermath of the train wreck, John climbs out of the wreckage, and he finds the Russian spy who was knocked out when the train crashed. John grabs the unconscious Russian spy and hides him when he hears some men coming. The men coming are some of the police squad, the same ones that attacked the hippie commune earlier and kidnapped Mercury. They are here to kill and finish off the Russian spy. So, John decides to drag Sergei Antonov far enough away that he won't be found. And then, John continues on his way. Afterwards, back at the Fear Machine, Corporal Morgan is all messed up. He was inside the heads of all those passengers on the train as they died of fear. This mental burden is too much for Morgan, and he returns to his room, sobbing. And there, he takes a pair of scissors and stabs them into his own eyes, killing himself. This death was something that Mercury foresaw earlier. Hellblazer Issue 18, The Fear Machine, Part 5, Hate Mail and Love Letters. A man named Jeffrey Talbot is a detective, the chief inspector within the police force. He is a good, honest cop, not corrupt. But he was investigating corruption within the police force, and he discovered a secret black squad being run by a Mr. Beals. The very same squad that is in the employ of Geotronics. Due to Jeffrey's investigation into his fellow police officers, he has started receiving hate mail. And when this issue opens up, we see Jeff's wife, Joan Talbot. She has been reading a lot of this hate mail that has been sent for her husband, and it is making her very upset. She is distraught over it. In today's batch of letters, one of them is addressed to Mr. Clean Bastard Talbot, and within the letter, they threaten to disfigure Joan herself with razor blades if Jeff doesn't quit. Joan, she already suffered from depression, and this letter is the last straw. She takes painkillers, then slits her wrists in the bath, killing herself. Elsewhere in Scotland, Marge, the mother of Mercury, she is writing a letter to John Constantine. Her and the other hippies have now joined up with the commune of the pagan nation in Scotland. In Marge's letter, she writes to John of how in tune with nature the people are here. She's also very impressed with the woman Zed, who now appears to be the leader of this pagan nation. And Marge says she watched Zed sing for hours, and then Zed led them all in an orgy. And Marge seemed to enjoy the experience because she says, "And the rest was pure lust, and there in the night in the cold dew we dedicated it to the earth, and I'm proud we did." Anyway, Marge ends her letter by asking if John has found Mercury yet. In London, John arrives at a hotel named Hotel Oscar Wilde. It is run by two homosexual men named Harold and Ken. This is the hotel that John was told he could stay at by some of his hippie friends when he left them. John has been living in this hotel, furthering his investigations for about 6 weeks now. John talks to the two men inside the hotel, and they both tell John that they're very interested in this article in the newspaper written by one of their very own patrons in this hotel, a journalist named Simon Hughes. Simon Hughes appears to be investigating a series of suicides connected with a company called Geotronics. John is, of course, very interested in this. John, he goes out on the town that night and goes to a bar in Soho, and in that bar, he unexpectedly meets that detective chief inspector, Jeffrey Talbot. Jeff has been working all day and he does not know that his wife committed suicide, the woman we saw at the beginning of this issue. Jeff recognizes Constantine and says, Well, Johnny Constantine, Where have you been hiding then? John expects this police officer to arrest him, but before he does, he asks, "Any chance of a large gin before we go then?" Jeff tells John, "Go? Why should we go anywhere? It's pissing with rain out there." John, a little surprised, asks, "Aren't you gonna arrest me then? I thought you blokes were never off duty." Jeff just laughs and says, "Oh, you mean with all that bloody shambles over there in Paddington? Oh, bless me, we never really thought that one was down to you." He's surprised. He asks, "Well then why? You know, his face was in the newspaper, he's a wanted man." Jeff replies, "Oh, we had to give something to the press, didn't we? We didn't have any real leads. Forensics just came up with a load of nonsense. No sign of fire, but the house was gutted. Deceased savaged with claws. And your name was on the list, and the papers picked it up because there was buckets of blood and black magic. Still, I don't suppose you were completely innocent, were you?" John slams his drink down and says, "Yes, completely." Anyway, Jeff has no interest in arresting John for those murders. And the two of them, they drink and talk into the night. That is when Jeff tells Constantine all of his problems, all the hate mail he's been getting, and how he's been investigating some of his fellow corrupt officers. Through their conversation, once John realizes that the corrupt officers that Jeff is referring to are the same ones that kidnapped Mercury, he becomes very interested. So they talk for quite a while on this, and Jeff is getting more and more drunk. So at the end of the night, John decides to help Jeff back home. And when they arrive back home, that is when Jeffrey realizes that his wife has committed suicide. Elsewhere at the Geotronics facility, Dr. Fulton has been training Mercury to use and hone her psychic abilities. Mercury then uses the Fear Machine device that uses the ley lines, and she accesses the minds of people out there in the world that are filled with fear. She then transfers that fear into the Fear Machine and then into a second device, which stores the fear. Mercury, she doesn't have really any problems with dealing with the fears of others, but she's starting to be a little bit concerned with the few glimpses of what she's seen growing in the device. Later on, John goes back to his hotel he's staying at, and he wants to speak to that journalist, Simon Hughes, that wrote the article in the paper on this Geotronics company. So John goes to Simon's hotel room, and he hears an odd noise, so he decides to let himself in. And there, John finds Simon tied up in the wardrobe, naked and hogtied with a bag over his head. Hellblazer Issue 19, The Fear Machine, Part 6, The Broken Man. John, he manages to free Simon. Simon is a little shaken, realizing that someone recently tried to kill him. Finally, once the journalist Simon calms down, him and John talk into the night, and Simon tells John everything he has learned about this Geotronics organization, and a string of suicides related to former employees of their company. So Geotronics is a defense subcontractor, supposedly working on tracking systems for nuclear submarines utilizing the planet's electromagnetic landscape. John sees through this, though, as it just being a cover for their use of ley lines as a delivery system for some kind of weapon. And that's why the Russians were interested, because they liked the idea of this new weapon. And then John also realizes that whatever it was that hit him when he was on that train must have been what he was attacked with. And then there's also the corrupt police squad that has been hounding them and kidnapped Mercury. Despite all this information, John is still having a hard time connecting all the pieces. Elsewhere, Mercury is still doing her work on the Fear Machine, although she is slowly refusing to cooperate with her captor, Dr. Fulton. Even though the two of them had established a little bit of a rapport, she is starting to feel really uneasy with the work that they are forcing her to do. They are having her extract fears from other people on the ley lines and transferring it into some sort of second device which stores that fear. And in that second device that is storing the fear, there seems to be some sort of creature that is forming. And this creature is called Jalacontiliocan. This Jalacontiliocan is also referred to as the God of all gods, or the GOAG. Elsewhere in Scotland, Marge and the rest of the hippies are with this pagan nation led by Zed, and they are doing all sorts of weird hippie bullshit. They're almost naked and they painted their bodies and they're rubbing juices all over themselves and dancing around a totem pole and yeah, anyway, they're up to a whole bunch of stuff. The main thing to take away is that Zed, who's leading the ritual, she seems to have some sort of philosophy that places women above men. So it's like very women-centric. And there's all sorts of magic going on. And through their magics, they are trying to bring Mercury back to them. Elsewhere, back at the Geotronics facility, Mercury has decided to try and take a stand and attempt to escape. Using her psychic abilities, she starts to influence Dr. Fulton, and she manages to convince him to take her out for a drive in his car. Meanwhile, in London, John is with Detective Jeff Talbot, as well as the journalist Simon Hughes. They attend the funeral of Jeff's wife that committed suicide. After the funeral, the three of them all travel together. They are on their way to Detective Jeff Talbot's home, as he has been harboring the Russian Sergei Antonov there, and they want to question him. As they enter the subway station, there's a weird, sketchy homeless man that apparently has been following John Constantine for a few days. The homeless man, acting erratically, leaps out in front of Constantine, shoves a paper into his mouth, and then he jumps in front of an oncoming train. And as he jumps in front of this train, he yells, "Jalacontiliocan!" which is the name of that weird creature inside the fear machine that is seemingly generating. John is a little shocked. John reaches into his mouth and pulls out the paper that the homeless guy shoved in there. The paper reads, "Tremble, the GOAG is coming." Simon, the journalist, when he studies the paper, he recognizes the symbol at the top. He says that he's seen it before. The bastard that strangled him, he wore that symbol on his ring. It turns out that that man was that Webster, the one that works as the security for Geotronics. Hellblazer Issue 20, The Fear Machine, Part 7, Betrayal. Mercury, with Dr. Fulton under her psychic influence, had managed to make Dr. Fulton fall in love with her. And then she had him transport her all the way to the train station. And at the train station, she manages to give him the slip and finally make her escape. Dr. Fulton would then go on to be arrested by the corrupt police Black Squad. Meanwhile, John Constantine, Jeff Talbot, and Simon Hughes all go back to Jeff Talbot's home, where he has secretly been harboring the Russian Sergei Antonov there. When all four of them are together, they talk and attempt to come up with a plan to stop Geotronics and their fear machine and their god that they are trying to awaken, Jalacontiliocan. John is sure that it will take some kind of magic of their own to stop this from happening. Before any real plans can be made, though, John pops out to the corner store to buy some painkillers for a headache he has. When John returns from the store, he finds the corrupt police squad outside arresting all of John's new allies. So John is now on his own. Elsewhere, Geotronics enforcer Webster. He collects Dr. Fulton from jail, and he hangs the doctor to death from a suspension bridge. just as we saw earlier in Mercury's visions. Later on, at the Geotronics facility, Webster starts going a little mad, and he begins a ritual. He takes the body of a boy and drags the boy to the fear machine, and strangles the boy to death, and stabs the corpse brutally. And with the boy's blood, he writes GOAG, which means the God of all gods. He writes this on one of the ley stones there, and he is furthering the process of rising this Jala Kuntiliakon god, this dragon. Hellblazer issue 21, The Fear Machine, part 8, The God of all gods. John, now alone, he decides to travel to Scotland to meet his old hippie friends as well as the pagan nation, as perhaps they can help. Along the way to Scotland, John stops at a diner, and he just so happens to run into Mercury, who had recently escaped from the Geotronics facility, and she had the same idea as well, to go to Scotland and meet everyone else. So the two of them now reunited hug and are happy to see one another, and they both finish their journey to Scotland together. Once they arrive at this pagan nation, everyone is happy to see John and Mercury there. Not Zed though. Zed, almost in a way, didn't even seem to recognize John. Also, John learns that something strange happened recently. A big storm had hit their settlement, and some kind of dark magic had killed several of the male members of the group, hanging their bodies from trees, and the branches were piercing through their limbs. John feels there's definitely some serious dark magic here at play. The kind of magic that can change things permanently in the world. Meanwhile, at the Geotronics facility, it is complete anarchy. This Webster guy is fully taken over, and he is slowly sacrificing more and more people to power up this Jala Kuntiliokon creature, this dragon. He's even sacrificing Geotronic employees, including their previous director. And John's new allies, Jeff Talbot, Simon Hughes, and Sergei Antonov, they're trapped in a room there of this fear machine, and they are waiting to also be sacrificed too, along with some others. Back at the pagan nation, John heads to one of the ley line intersections and begins meditating. He is drawn into the magic, where he then sees his new journalist friend Simon Hughes being murdered and sacrificed by Webster. Thus, the urgency for John and the others to do something becomes all that more important. Hellblazer issue 22, The Fear Machine, part 9 of 9, Balance. John, he wakes up from a disturbing dream to find Zed there. Zed finally acknowledges John and says that she recalls him, but she dismisses John's feelings towards her. And she describes how the Resurrection Crusade had told her that she was meant to mother a god, and how she didn't know what that meant at the time, but now she does. John, he's overcome by his desire for Zed, but she stops him. They have to focus on their mission. Soon, John addresses the pagan nation, and with Zed's help, they realize that this Jala Kuntiliakon, this dragon that's coming, is the male aspect of duality, and there's a yin and a yang, and without the balance of a female counterpart, this dragon's awakening would be chaos for the world. So Zed, she knows of a way to balance out this maleness of this dragon here with her own female force. And as Zed is coming up with a plan, meanwhile, in the Fear Machine's chamber, Jeff Talbot watches as more of his fellow prisoners are hung and mutilated by Webster. Jeff, he waits and he manages to grab Davis, the Black Squad police officer member responsible for his wife's suicide, the one that kind of pushed her into it. So Jeff, he grabs Davis, strangles him, and kills him, finally getting his revenge and avenging his wife. Unwittingly, though, Jeff made Davis the final sacrifice needed to awaken the dragon. So this Jala Kuntiliakon dragon finally awakens into the world. And back in Scotland, Zed is going to put her plan into action. And this last part is insane and hella bonkers. Okay, so Zed needs to bring forth her own female dragon. So in order to do this, her and Marge talk Constantine into a threesome. So they all have sex with Constantine, and Zed becomes pregnant through this process. So Zed, she has immediately become pregnant, and then Marge becomes a midwife for her, and Marge helps Zed birth an egg. Okay? Marge, holding the egg, says, "Yes, oh yes." John, now looking in the sky, comments, "It's coming, look, Jalacantilicon." Marge and Zed begin running away with the egg. John tells them, "Wait, don't leave me." And Zed responds, "No time, you've done your part. Now it's time for femaleness." Now it's time for femaleness. Okay. Jalacantilicon, the dragon, bursts out of the ground there in Scotland, and Zed and Marge, joined by Mercury, all naked by the way, begin doing some sort of weird ritual over the egg. And soon enough, a female dragon hatches from Zed's egg. The female dragon then flies in the sky and it intertwines with the male dragon, thus creating a balance and thus somehow saving the world. And before John can witness more, he gets swept away in a massive wave of seawater. And in a one-page epilogue, when John wakes up, he finds himself on a small fishing boat. The fishing boat picked him up in the water. John is a little shaken, and he's not fully sure what happened, doesn't fully remember. But despite his shock, he asks the men on the boat if any of them's got a cigarette. And with this, we end Volume 3, The Fear Machine. Alright, so that was Volume 3. Let me go through my thoughts. I thought the artwork was still pretty good. But yeah, the story I did not like. So it is very overwritten. There are so many characters to keep track of. I actually started omitting some of the characters because I was like, you guys don't need to know this particular person. It doesn't really affect the story. But even with the ones I did explain in the video, there's so many of them and they all have different motivations and like what's going on with all of them. And anyway, some of the hippie stuff with John in the beginning, I actually didn't mind. I thought it was a kind of a fun change of scenery to have John hanging out with these hippies on the run from the police, trying to lie low. He sort of becomes like a family with these hippies. You know, that was okay. I thought some of the stuff with the Fear Machine was kind of intriguing. Like the concept of it is kind of cool, where they have these ley lines and there's this machine and there's all these psychics and they're trying to send fear along the ley lines to like make people kill themselves and whatnot. Kind of cool, kind of cool. All right, they're trying to build some sort of like creature within the Fear Machine or something. Okay, sure. But then they got this dragon or something, this Jalacantilicon, which I thought was like forming within the Fear Machine, but then all of a sudden it like appears in Scotland at the end. Okay, and then some of the hippie bullshit becomes really intense near the end once they hook up with the pagan nation and Zed. And Zed is doing all sorts of crazy shit. And then the last sort of conclusion to the story arc where the Jalacantilicon thing finally arrives. And then Zed has a threesome with John. And then she births an egg. And the egg births a dragon. And the dragon is very female. And it balances the maleness of the Jalacantilicon dragon and the intertwined, and that saves the world or something. Okay, what the fuck? What the hell is going on there? What is going on? And then John gets swept away in a wave, and that's the end of it. What is going on in here, man? Oh my god. Like partly you can kind of find it amusing that with the whole egg thing and how bizarre that was, and like it's kind of interesting. But I I don't know. I found large parts of the storyline kind of boring, and I really hated the conclusion, and it was very hard to follow. So this was a rough one for me, man. This is one of my least favorite books I've covered here on my channel. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 10. I really disliked a lot of it. Wow. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to see how many of you are on my side and how many of you are going to defend the book and say I'm wrong. Man, I'm wondering how controversial my opinion is going to be on this one. But anyway, continuing on with Volume 4 next week, and which I believe is going to be better. We'll see. And we'll be getting over to Garth Ennis soon. So that's going to be really exciting. So I will see you all in the future with more Hellblazer.